Hello, welcome to the third episode of the 2020 KeSpa Cup reviews. I'm LinkingX2 and thank you for coming by. On today's third day of games, teams of Group A are facing each other for the second and last time. In this video we're going over the drafts and the team matchups, but you already know that, so let's start with the first match. So we have Liiv Sandbox with Damwon with Renekton, Nidalee, Syndra and Kai'Sa with Alistar in support versus Ornn, Taliyah, Lucian, Misfortune and Galio. So the top lane matchup, already talked about that one 3 or 4 times already in this series, so yeah, we leave this behind. Also the matchup in the jungle, Taliyah and Nidalee, we had that a couple times yesterday. A short rundown here, focusing more on the mid laners. The 1v1 again in Nidalee's favor. The 2v2s here, the CC setup in mid comes from different sources, right? The Taliyah versus the Syndra, which can make a difference because, well, in the counter gank scenario, the counter gank of a Taliyah with her CC is way easier to do than the one of Nidalee. But again, these top half champions, we see them nearly every time, and in many cases we already saw these exact 6 champions facing off each other, so that's a classical duo here. Similar in the bot lane, Kai'Sa versus MF, Alistar and Galio. Again, a normal bot lane matchup, as we mainly see these 3 AD carries, MF, Kai'Sa and yeah, if not banned, Samira. I won't talk too much about it unless it's very important for the team, depending also on the pods or the players playing these champions. So Alistar, Galio, we haven't seen that so much, so a bit of a longer context here. They're very similar themed, I feel like. In the lane, Galio on the other side offers more combat and push power, but Alistar against melee engaged champions, he knocks them away. As such, Misfortune and friends will take the CS lead. Be happy to have Galio roam first, even pre-6. Again, the difference won't be too major and won't make a great impact, meaning results in kills or multiple tower plates. Overall very basic and meta champions, nothing too crazy here. The Taliyah Lucian versus Nidalee Renekton, obviously the first has a way better target, the Syndra, especially in comparison to the Ornn. Using that and the bot prio, Damwon looks for invades and fights in the bottom half of the map. With their earlier spikes in items, they could force fights around the Drakes, which could work as a form of insurance. I always like the Heralds more, because they give the power now and better close and finish the game now than in 20 minutes. On the other side, Sandbox, they want to work with their top lane directly or indirectly, either going to top lane or calling Summit down to the mid lane for larger skirmishes there. And champion, yeah, like the Renekton, can really work out fine with his gold ranker in these skirmishes. It's not the poor Renekton of old times. Still then, Damwon's comp is just better in skirmishes. They are faster as well with the Galio, and the Misfortune with her stride passive can move up faster. Ornn can interact with the fights from longer range as well. So even if Sandbox is initiating a fight on a numbers advantage, Damwon can answer fastly. If then they are fighting, they have the lead in their champions and their power spikes. This results obviously in the Damwon gaming win. Remember the clear gap in the individual skill here. Also this locks Damwon now in the top 6. They 100% advance. We have to wait if they get the first bye or if they have to play a quarterfinals match. Coming to the next one, NS RedForce vs Afreeca Freecs, Aatrox vs Jace, Graves vs Olaf, Orianna vs Syndra, Aphelios Thresh vs Kai'Sa Gragas. So top lane, yeah, not much to say. Even though we haven't seen this matchup all that much, we all know what Jace does into a melee matchup. Especially here we have Keen, one of the best top laners in the LCK at the moment, so obviously he's generating quite a good lead in the 1v1 if undisturbed. So Graves Olaf, similarly to the Nidalee Taliyah one, these 4 junglers are just seen again and again. We have already talked about every iteration of these duos, so it depends mostly on their partner. Olaf has the better ones in Syndra and Jace, so he can be more aggressive, which could backfire a bit because Graves counter ganks are quite nice, but still Olaf has the advantage through his solo lanes. Orianna Syndra, again a farming lane. If there's a player which is clearly better than the other one, he can manipulate the lane in certain ways to get a bit of a control, to get a bit of a lead, but unless some major errors happen here, this is just a stale farm lane. In the bot lane we have some interesting picks here from NS RedForce with the Afreeca and the Thresh. They are very aggressive in lane and they are punishing Kai'Sa's weak point there. They shouldn't underestimate Gragas though, because his turn ability, so he doesn't really want to engage in the Thresh, but if Thresh goes in, Gragas obviously can turn, and this turn ability of this Gragas is very very strong. He's level 6 obviously as well, can hurt Afreeca's quite great if NS is playing it carefully and mainly use the threat of their cooldowns, meaning they don't engage into the Gragas but they threaten and engage, then obviously Afreeca has to respect that threat, have to back off, and then NS can get a smaller but secure lead in the bot lane, get the safe and decent lane. And late game, yeah, Thresh does a little less than Gragas. In this game though, he is more than a Hulk lottery. His lantern very important for Orianna and Aphelios though, and exactly this makes the Gragas also stronger, right? Thresh's lantern to protect immobile targets, Gragas barrel to attack these set targets. Talking about the overall team here, early game goes for Afreeca because of this top side as I mentioned. If they use Jace correctly, that is, then using that they can hide Kai'Sa's weakness in the early and mid game a bit. The rest of the team wants to fight with around 2 items. As such, Dragon and early Herald fights are very good here. They have to abuse their range before that though, because yeah, they have the range advantage and lack a clear front line against the skirmishers of Aatrox and Graves, who like the short range brawl. So yeah, hitting them from far away is exactly what Afreeca wants and needs to do here. If NS can get the Ori ult or the Thresh hook without being half-healthed by Afreeca, yeah, they have some serious trouble. And also if they are split up and picked apart, they need to be one gun and shoot out their spells at the combined roster of NS so that they can chunk them out. Especially now with the new items, there are so many movement speed increase items. If Afreeca is really splitting up or being split apart, this could be pretty ugly. In reality it was a bit like that. It was one Ori ult into a Baron. If a siege or poke team is being sieged and pressed into their own base, they have great problems with some mispositioning and some errors individually. NS is in the end able to secure the win against Afreeca. Afreeca is now more or less completely out of it. But moving to the third game here, Dragon X versus Liiv Sandbox, Voli versus Renekton top lane, Graves versus Taliyah, Ori versus Zoe, Samira Galio versus Jhin Alistar. So starting in top lane, as always, remember the Voli Renekton matchup from the LCK or the earlier Worlds games. Yeah, in case you don't, Voli counters Renekton quite hard. Already talked about this matchup quite extensively in the first videos on my channel. If you're really interested in that, I recommend to check them out. Simply said, Voli destroys Renekton, he bullies him, has great sustain in lane. Graves versus Taliyah, they have similar clear speed in the 1v1. It mostly depends on who gets the jump on the other one, but even then Graves has the advantage in many times here. Here the Taliyah Renekton is similar to the Nidalee variant, high damage, quite easy to do. Again, they have not the ideal target with the Volibear, but to attack the Orianna in mid lane is more possible for the Taliyah in this case. Graves has no real setup in his lanes, either Voli or Orianna. Not really nice setup here. Orianna though is a very nice champion to skirmish with, getting the shield and the movement speed increase, as well as the resistances for the Graves increases good skirmish ability by quite a bit. Orianna into Zoe, another control mage matchup. Orianna the easier champion to lane with and play with, I have to say. She can bully Zoe quite well with her ball, especially in the earlier parts of the lane. Her abilities also have shorter cooldown. Her auto attacks are stronger through her passive. CS lead wouldn't be a surprise for me. Again, not a really explosive matchup as we expect nowadays. Moving to the bot lanes, Samira, Galio and Jhin Alistar. Jhin, a very potent laner and has strong early game power due to his push, CC, his long range and so on. Samira on the other side suffers from the normal scaling power hole in the early game. And yeah, that support matchup won't change much on this factor. In this case here, Galio could maybe get onto Jhin as he's immobile, maybe could create problems, but effort will be there for the headbot, so the decent CS lead for the Jhin will be there, and depending on the flow, if the supports roam or not, it could be smaller or larger by quite a bit, but shouldn't be that substantial, just what you expect if you have like a scaling bot lane on one side. In the mid-game fights, Sandbox has a strong advantage because this time the poke-like comp has power spikes early, leads, as well as follow-up engage. In comparison, Dragon X can engage even if they scale up from behind. They have no real options, right? A Volibear running in, followed up by a Galio. This is very linear, so not really all that crisp. They have damage, but yeah, they can't use it though. If you're dead or slowed and then poked and finally then collapsed on by the Renekton, looks very dire. Dragon X can look for combos in top lane with a roaming Galio. Sandbox can only match the roam partially with an Alistar. He's not as fast as the Galio obviously with his ult, but still very potent, and he doesn't have to worry about Jhin being left alone in the 1v1. Their top 2 vs 2 very potent as well, considering player strength. I would say that they have the better 2v2 here even, and yeah, not too convincing. If Dragon X can draw Sandbox apart like NS did with Afreeca, they could create greater obstacles, but they're still not able to overcome them. Through this, LS Sandbox can win the game. Dragon X couldn't really do it. The Voli was fine by the way, it's still good in the 1v1 versus the Renekton, but their team was just poked and barraged. Coming to the halfway point here, if you liked it so far, please show it with a like or comment below. It's just one click, really helps out a lot though. Post your own opinions on these analysis points in the comments. Any critique if you have any. Really glad to see that some of you did that already. Thank you for that. Anyway, moving on to the 4th game, Damwon versus Afreeca. Aatrox, Olaf Syndra, Jhin and Maokai face off Renekton, Kha'Zix, Echo, Misfortune and Seraphine. The top lane, it should be a common matchup, but it really isn't. Aatrox versus Renekton, not something we see all that often. Aatrox is a rather safe pick in some cases, but the Croco here is running the lane from early on. Aatrox has to play very safely, but even then Renekton can trade with him. Yeah, and he has little ability to counteract that. The slice and dice is just way too fast, and even the manaless sustain for both of them, Renekton just beats out Aatrox in that department as well. In the jungle, Olaf vs Kha'Zix, so Olaf farms faster and Kha'Zix is not your normal champ. He falls into the category of win more champs here. He backs up his laners that are winning already, secures natural objectives quite easily, and yeah, in the 1v1 farm department he's losing out though, but that's okay for him. Again, he's a win more champion, he helps his Renekton and his Echo in the mid lane. The Echo into the Syndra, a long time counter. We have seen that at Worlds at some points. Yeah, we have to see if Kaney can do that against Showmaker, which is obviously very questionable. But in theory though, Echo has this matchup in every case here. Then coming to the bot lane, Jhin Maokai, Misfortune Seraphine, a matchup also, yeah, that is not seen quite often overall, but the Jhin Misfortune one, we have seen that quite often. Even if Misfortune goes for the tier, which is more common nowadays, she still is one of the most lane dominant champions in the bot lane. For many, if you are not really familiar with Seraphine, talking about the supports here, you could imagine her like a Sona or a Lux. Very squishy, works nicely if she has the push, so similar to Kha'Zix, a win more champion. If she has this push, she can bully the Jhin from here and there. She has to pay attention to the tree though, because he hurts a lot. She's very immobile, very squishy as I said. Comes level 6, yeah, there's a great problem, which is nearly unavoidable for her. In the mid game here, Damwon Gaming with their pick potential versus Afreeca's pick potential. Important is the execution here and the leads from the laning phase. A strong Misfortune, Renekton and Echo. They do really well. Maokai's ult and Jhin with Syndra follow up is a potent problem for them. That is on a very large cooldown because the main engages the Maokai ultimate and it requires Afreeca to overextend in longer lanes or the river. But if that hits, it's certainly devastating for the entire roster. Remember how I said that Kha'Zix is a win champion? Seraphine works similar, with both of them only working quite okay from ahead. Then if Afreeca is fumbling their lead, which they potentially should have. So if they're even or behind, they have a great problem as they have just 3 other champions. I don't expect them to play this good consistently as they are an 0-3 team. I don't really believe that they should pick this and that they are able to execute this accordingly, and especially not against Damwon Gaming. Afreeca, they have no engage as well besides Seraphine, so if your win more champion is also kinda very important for your team, it becomes even harder to come back, and no frontline as well to block the slows or the engage of Damwon. Their comp is quite suboptimal. If you could go for a different route, you could say that the players are not good enough yet to play such a difficult comp, but I would not go this route of saying, okay, the comp is too difficult. The comp has potential obviously, but it's always very questionable if you draft yourself into this very hole where you have to be oh so good to come out of it. If you draft correctly, you don't need top tier players to win a game through draft unless the enemy team is just way too good, right? Draft is not the win one, win all situation, but it's certainly very important to set up your team for success. And I feel Afreeca Freecs draft wasn't really all that kind for them and their players. It results in Damwon Gaming's victory, as I alluded. That locks them first with the 4-0 record. Now moving to the last game, NS versus Dragon X, GP Graves, Silas, Kaiser, Leona, facing off Gragas, Kindred, Cassio, Misfortune and Alistair. In the top lane, Gragas versus GP, not a matchup seen all that often, I know. So yeah, maybe you don't know that Gragas is a surprisingly strong early game champion, even though his armor got nerfed for these AD opponent. His sustain, poke, wave clear and his W resistances combined with the high base damage he has make him a bully against squishier targets. He's not a chase, he's going to literally bump Gangplank on the head with his barrel. Then his roams, if he has the push, are also very nice, especially into this very competitive jungle matchup here. Kindred, yeah, a very difficult champion, but Pioshik as a Kindred main, I mean his name means mark, and Peanut also a Graves main, both know what they're doing here, and it's always great to see these main matchups, main versus main overall, even if we leave the skill of the players behind. In this matchup it depends mostly on the one jumping the other, and it's also a very volatile matchup with the one with the lead being able to bully the other one quite easily. So the Gragas being able to move first, not paying attention here to the GP level 6 obviously, but the Gragas moving earlier, certainly a nice help for Kindred to get her marks. In the mid lane, Silas vs Cassio. Cassio, although she is a mage, has nice early power in her kit and should control the lane and matchup. If Silas gets a few items and then he can do some of his usual things, he has the potential to do something around the early game if he is playing smartly around the few early levels, because certainly his engage is also very potent. But for that he needs to outplay it nearly perfectly, dodging the core abilities. Cassio has to misposition quite badly, so I would not recommend that, and don't really think it's all too likely that he's able to get the level 3 catch on her. Cassio is having the control in this lane, will shove him onto the turret, control the push. Silas then, maybe if he can get a roam off, can steal an ultimate, maybe from the Gragas. Yeah, that could really work very well for him, getting the AP ratio and hitting the immobile Cassio. But till then, Cassio has this in her snake pocket. Kaiser Leona versus Misfortune Alistair. Not wasting your time here with the 15th time we've seen the spot lane matchup. Just mentioning that Alistair is very important for his team as the only real primary engage source. Leona, she has better roam targets than the Alistair, especially because the Cassiopeia in the mid lane, right? The early lead should be with Dragon X here, having the advantage in all lanes. It's super great for the Kindred, even more than any other jungler. Early heralds, maybe getting a Drake if you have nothing to do. Dragon X should just accelerate the game, having powerful scaling champions in the early game. In Kindred or the Cassio is more powerful than some other setups here. Also, NS has great scaling, so Dragon X with their lead, they can just play away from this scaling, from this NS win condition. NS, yeah, they have the nice wave clear to hold on for the first fights here. It's hard to say, because it very depends on who got the lead and how did Dragon X execute it. If Dragon X has set lead, they should have the tempo advantage with getting the vision leads and then get the proper picks. And with these picks, a champion like Casio and Kindred in many cases just outstat DPS you. If they fumbled their lead though, and for example Rich is getting his gold, NS has a very good way to slow the immobile targets and then follow up with, for example, Silas or an Leona engage, and then burst with Graves and GP as well, either before Pioshik can ult or just afterwards. So yeah, if Dragon X is fumbling their early lead, it can get pretty ugly for them. In these cases, Gragas and Alistar have the hard task to repel set engage, thinking about gangplank as I mentioned at the very beginning. The barrel chain or the cannon barrage are abilities that are not avoidable for these immobile champions, and the peel of Gragas and Alistar is not strong enough to repel these as well. With that being said, we saw in the game Dragon X was not able to hold their lead, then got into the meat grinder. NS secures the win and locks second place, sending Dragon X to the third. And that's it for this third day of the reviews. Thank you for watching so far. In the playlist you can find the previous KeSpa Cup review episode. Maybe you're interested in other off-season content as well. That also you can find in the playlist or on my channel in general. Anyway, hope you had a good time. If you did, please leave a like or a comment. Again, it really helps out a lot, especially feedback or any questions. But that's it for now though. Please stay safe, have some merry pre-Christmas days. Bye.